Ready? You have the cameras rolling?
Welcome to Outspoken.
This better be good.
A show about
floods, mutant, plagues, man-eating plants.
Actually, it's about thought-provoking, compelling conversations with people who have something important to say, a good story to tell, or knowledge we can learn from.
Oh, good for you.
And now,
Hold on to your butts.
here's Scott and Curtis.
All right. Hello and welcome to the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis. I'm Scott, and the other guy you see there on the screen, that's Curtis. Hey, Curtis.
Hey, Scott. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, too. So a few weeks back, we gave you some insight into the life of Scott. And today we're going to talk a little bit about our co-host, Curtis. And Curtis has a really unique story. And so outside podcasting, Curtis is a really highly sought after executive consultant. And he's a thought leader in Kanban for information work. And he did something that he won't talk about, but I love to torture about it and bring it up whenever I can in conversations. And that is, he's a former Hollywood actor. And Hollywood, Curtis, I know, in the conceptual form of Hollywood, or the, but that included a stint as Cheo in Prison Break. So Curtis, you had a pretty cool stint in Hollywood. Again, conceptual Hollywood. So tell us about that journey and what it was like.
It was interesting. I kind of got there bass backwards, Scott. To be honest with you, I did acting in high school and things like that, but never thought that I had that whole imposter syndrome about acting. I did have some encouragement in college, but just didn't feel like I had.
Interesting. I didn't know you acted in high school, and that's interesting. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Just, local stuff, the one act plays, the duet actings and stuff, but we used to compete. We used to have, so I was on the debate team, but also on the thespian team. So I was on the forensics and the thespian team. And we actually had a lot of success. It was a lot of fun, met some great people. Met a really, really good friend who's out in California now, runs senior partner in a major law firm out in San Francisco. He was one of my professors. He was or one of my teachers. He was a Supreme Court clerk.
Oh, wow.
Clerking for the justices. And anyway, lots and lots of good people, but I didn't really start pursuing it in any earnest fashion until I was in the UK, and I met a young lady who would later become my wife, and she had signed up to do a student film with a German director who was taking the Leeds film program, and he was actually shooting on 35 millimeter. It was a real shoot. It was about 30-minute show, and they needed somebody to play like an American Italian thug, and they didn't know any.
Really?
You do the accents, nobody could do
that.
that.
So I'm gonna show this really quick. So if you want to picture Curtis, the guy you see on screen right now as the thug, let's put a little context here. Let's see. This is Curtis as Cheo in Prison Break. So yes, he's slightly different now, but yeah, that's Curtis. Anyway, and you're gonna have to explain this at some point too when we're having our discussion. So just wanted to anyway, go ahead. So you started there, and then what?
Yeah, so did that little film with him and kind of got the bug. But I happened to be staying over in England doing a master's degree, and also doing some studio recording with my band. And so that avenue was taking off. And at the same time, I had started a consulting company.
And that all led to acting.
And that all led to acting. Yeah, exactly. So, fast forward to roughly 2002, I think. I'm married to my wife, Mary Buchek, and she starts pulling me into the acting world here in Austin, because she and I both wanted to be in a place that had not only business opportunity, but also artistic opportunities. And there was a lot happening in Austin at that time. Texas had a lot of film incentives similar to what you're seeing in Georgia now, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Mexico. That was all happening in Texas at the time. So there was a lot of production here. And so I started just, falling into those circles, and found an agent who, actually an agent found me. We were in class together, and she said, "I want to sign you. I just bought this agency."
Oh, cool.
Okay. It felt like somebody, coming on to you to do a highly questionable photo shoot. It's like, I didn't know how to vet an agent, right? So she said, no, I'm totally legit. Look, I'm going to send you to this audition. It's for the lead villain role in a Tommy Lee Jones movie. And of course,
Wow.
who Tommy Lee Jones is. And I said, oh, okay. She says, if you think I'm messing you about, don't worry. You don't have to sign anything. Just go. And the casting director was Joanna Bolden, who's cast just a crap ton of things, and she's amazing. She now lives in New Mexico, but she was based in Austin for years and years, and she was tight with this woman, Liz Atherton, who became my agent. And one thing led to another, and I ended up on a couple of shows. Did a good HBO villain role with a young lady named Jordana Spiro, who's had quite the career. Edward Furlong, he was the young John Connor in Terminator 2.
Okay. Yeah, I think I saw part of that one.
Yeah.
But so how did that lead to Prison Break? And I know I keep going back there, but that's just extra cool.
My favorite show.
Mhm.
Tell me about the time you were in prison with 200 other big sweaty guys.
Exactly.
I really want to know more, Curtis.
So what was that like, though? I mean, that's the typical Hollywood experience, right? I mean, a little bit different than what people think.
So here's the funny thing about that. I almost didn't go. I actually booked the role and almost didn't go.
Wow.
So I almost didn't go to the audition, and then when I booked the role, I almost didn't take it. And in both instances, I have my wife to thank for pushing me, because we had we thought we were not going to be able to have kids, so we were going to move out to LA, and we bought our first house, but we were thinking, yeah, maybe we really want to be in Los Angeles. Right. My agent was encouraging me to go. We had some buzz from the HBO thing I shot with Furlong and Spiro. And in the meantime, I had this this regular job working in, the IT area for an insurance company. And, all of a sudden we were pregnant, and we had a 6-month-old. And we're thinking, maybe we don't want to move to LA. We'll just
LA to go. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, I know we could have a separate discussion about that, Scott, and we will.
Yes, as a reformed Californian, yes.
Yeah. But no, I thought, I can't take this. So I got the audition notice, but it was in Dallas, and it was for it. That season was to be shot in Guatemala, Miami, some in Texas, and various places.
Wow.
But it was set in Guatemala, and it was for a native Spanish speaking, Hispanic looking prisoner. And I thought, I'm not really fit the role. I'm not gonna. But my wife was like, you're 1/4 Puerto Rican, go for it. So I went ahead and I made the drive, did the audition, and made it to the director's read. And then a couple weeks later, I got a call, hey, you booked the role. And then it was sort of like a dog who catches, the car he's been chasing. I'm like, oh crap, what do I do now? And then I told my wife, who was out of town at the time, and I said, the good news is I got the role. The bad news is, I can't really take it. And expected her to say, yeah, you can't take it. You got a 6-month-old kid, and you got a mortgage. And
yeah.
She said, no, what are you talking about? You're going to take the role. I said, sweetie, there's no guarantee, right? I mean, the writers could write me out after a show, and, we got to pay the mortgage. And she said, don't worry about it. You'll find something.
Wow.
And that just tells you about my wife. Right? She's fantastic, but very positive, really believed, not only in my ability to do this gig, but also just that we'd be fine. And that's fantastic attitude to have in life, really. But she encouraged me to go, and the rest is history, as they say.
So how was it? Tell us about the actual experience.
Oh, it was really fantastic. But I couldn't take so for those of you who haven't done acting, actors are like racehorses, right? And we're constantly, jumping at the bit, just pawing, at the stall, waiting for the gates to open and us to fly out and do our acting thing. And the challenge with film acting is it's like war. There's hours and hours of waiting, and then 5-10 minutes of action. And even when there's action, it's you may get halfway through a cut, and halfway through a take, and there'll be cut, hold for plane, cut, reset the lights,
Recapture that emotion. It was great.
Exactly.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
When you were sobbing and feeling like that was perfect, do that again.
I know it was a half hour ago, but that was great. Do that again. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. So I was used to stage acting for the most part, right? Where it's, you gear up for weeks, and then you go out and you hit it. And if you screw up a line in front of, 1,000 people, oh, well, you
Yep.
roll with it, you figure it out, you adapt. Like Clint Eastwood and Heartbreak Ridge, right? You improvise, you adapt, you overcome. But in film acting, it's cut. Unless it's a great mistake, but usually it's cut and you reset and then you do it again. So in the meantime, you have a lot of downtime. So I did a lot of push-ups. I was doing 200 or 300 push-ups a day because
You got to look like the bad guy in prison.
You got to look like the guys, and you're just bored a lot. But there were some fantastic people there, some really amazing athletes and stuntmen, and people who who were like part of the Cirque du Soleil troops.
Oh, wow.
And people who were part of the SeaWorld troops that did the acrobatic stuff.
Yep.
And, ex-gymnasts.
All those people, incredible athletes. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. And they were always giving us tips. Like we would have all these, I wouldn't call them push-up competitions. Well, some of them did push-up competitions. I could never compete with that, but they would give, watch them do things. And they would, like, these are the Supermans, and you do this diamond, put your nose in the middle and push back up. So we got pretty healthy, I would say. But in the meantime, one of the guys we worked on the show with was a guy named Robert Wisdom, who many of our listeners might remember from The Wire, and he's been on just a million things. And he was a staple. He was kind of the staple bad guy for that season, and just really got to know people. And interesting thing, Bob Wisdom got a really late start in life on acting, was working at the Smithsonian, and he was like, he wasn't a docent, but he had a job in the Smithsonian, like he was a curator of one of the exhibits, and just, kind of stumbled backward into this stuff and had a really, really cool career, and in the meantime, I would just sit around and think about kind of our world, Scott, and think about, okay, this is a split location, multiple split location, distributed location, production that's really moving at an incredible pace. I mean, every week we were shooting an episode, whereas when you shoot movies, you're generally shooting 2 pages a day, something like that, maybe 8 if you're at a breakneck pace. And we were shooting 10, 12, 14 pages a day.
Wow.
And this, you have to understand, this was the #1 show in the world.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that either. Wow.
It was globally a huge global hit. I mean, I would get fan mail from everywhere.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
China, all Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and Africa, and just everywhere. I don't even know how they found my address. But it was the #1 show in the world. I thought, when I took the role, I was thinking, like, I never watched season 1. I was thinking, this is Escape from Alcatraz, like made into a TV series. How are they going to make a TV series in 100 episodes of this? But it was huge, and as a result, they had so many people on set. I mean, we had, I don't know, almost 100 extras, atmosphere and blah, blah, blah. But then we had a very large crew of a very large cast of principals, and then you've got your video village and your gaffers and your electricians and sound folks and, production assistants and the whole bit. And so from a business standpoint, I'm just trying to do the math in the back of a napkin. And I started talking to one of the line producers, and I said, "Oh yeah, this show is $1 million per finished minute
to make."
Yeah,
that's nuts.
And I said, "So if I screw up my line,
that's $1 million bucks." Yeah.
She's like, "Yeah."
So you're doing this, and you had to come out of this show. So you were on, I don't know how many episodes, but you were on a bunch of episodes. You come out of the show, there had to be buzz, and so you had to make some decisions, huh?
Yeah. It was one of those things, but at the end of the day, my wife and I decided to. So this is something interesting I'll share with you. This was back in 2006. Yeah, 2006, beginning of 2007. We were still, especially on top of this buzz, my agent was really pushing, like, go to LA. This is your time. Go. Seize the day. And I actually thought about doing a self-produced reality show. And this is 2006. So YouTube is really just coming on the scene.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about being a YouTube star, because there was no such thing. But I thought about making a documentary of, what's it like for a 40-year-old guy to go out and start his acting career, and just see what happened. Just see what happened and just film it. And I chickened out. And, we never did. I said, you know what? I've got consulting opportunities here, and we've got the baby, we've got a mortgage. So, and at the time, my father was very, very ill and passed that year. So, I mean, that was another major reason not to go, is, quite far away. But I just thought that would have been an interesting sort of reality show. And who knows if I would have landed another gig ever, right? But I had landed some since here in Austin, and so I've been on all the networks.
Nice.
But I thought that would have been an interesting journey, and I don't know that I've seen anybody actually make that yet. So maybe somebody has, and I'm just
I don't know.
Haven't had.
I don't know. So the interesting byproduct here is you've made the decision. So evidently, you just made the decision. Okay, I'm not going to do the Hollywood thing. I'm going to stay more local, and I'm going to focus on business, which both of us had to do at some point. But it had the effect on your family of having 3 daughters that are all very involved in I guess you could say Hollywood, the general Hollywood, or in acting and singing and on stage, which is pretty crazy. Can you just talk a little bit about it, because it's such a cool story. And by the way, for our listeners, I went out. Curtis invited us, and my family and I went out and watched his daughter do Les Mis as the young Cosette.
Little Cosette.
And so here's Curtis's daughter on stage in front of a huge crowd in Miami, downtown Miami, and doing a solo song, like right off the bat. It was amazing to see. And all 3 of his daughters are like this. They're just pretty amazing for young women. Anyway, go ahead, Curtis.
Thank you, Scott. They are amazingly talented. They've got nerves of steel. I can't imagine being that age and stepping out in front of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people and doing a solo.
It's great. It was crazy, and it was so good. It was so good.
Yeah, they'll make good airline pilots, right? They've got that nerves of steel. Because
Yeah.
It's
So,
like,
so
are
tell,
you nervous? And yeah, totally nervous. You don't show
doesn't show. Yeah.
it.
So, what are they in now? What are they in, and what are they doing?
Danielle just had her South by Southwest debut. She shot a movie a couple of years ago with Richard Linklater, who did School of Rock, Dazed and Confused, about a boy. Was it about a boy? No. Waking Life and Boy's Life. Yeah. And he's sort of a local Austin hero. He shot a movie called Apollo 10 and a half, which is out on Netflix right now. And
Yep.
it premiered at South by Southwest. And so she got the whole red carpet treatment and, you know, the panels and the speakings. That was great. Let's see. Last month, Nisha, our youngest, we went out to Comic-Con because she was a featured speaker on one of the panels out there for a movie that's premiering next week in LA at the LA Film Festival called Nix, which is a psychological horror. And
So she's the featured speaker on a panel. And how old is she?
11.
11. That's so cool.
Yeah, they all have better careers before puberty than I had my whole life. And then Madeline, the middle daughter, she was in LA a couple of weeks ago shooting 2 movies. One for Comedy Central with Rob Riggles and oh my God, guy from Arrested Development, his name escapes me, but he is hilarious. Sucks getting old, but anyway, there was 2 movies that she was shooting. That was one of them, and she had just wrapped a movie with Kate Bosworth, Ryan Phillippe, and Ving Rhames, which I think, well, she did some ADR work, which is voiceover work, just recently, which usually happens when they're pretty far into finishing up the production. So I think that should debut, if not end of this year, the early next.
What's the name of that one? The Ving Rhames and
The Ving Rhames movie is called The Locksmith. At least that's
Locksmith.
the title as of now.
And you told me the story because we talk all the time. Even when we're not doing a podcast, we talk all the time. But you had this cool story about how they were just sitting around on set and they decided to sing a song. And
yeah, Ving Rhames is super sweet to her. Just, you know, he's such a big, burly, scary looking guy when he wants to be, right? But just a marshmallow. And my daughter is just the wafiest, you know, little petite thing. And so that must have been quite spectacle. I wasn't on set to see it. Mary was with them, but you know, they were sitting around singing. He's a Juilliard grad.
Which is amazing, isn't it? I mean, that's not something you expect. This big, tough, mean guy is a Juilliard grad. That's so cool.
Yeah, you kind of think of him as more like a Terry Crews guy. Just kind of came up, Hard Knocks, and
no, Juilliard. That's not the same school.
He's super talented, you know, and does tons of voiceover work. His voice is everywhere. And he's got that, you know, James Earl Jones voice god kind of thing. So he was sitting around on the set with Madeline, and they were singing something just for fun, you know, and he was so encouraging to her, so sweet, and said, "Oh, you know, you've got a lot of talent. You know, you could do really well at Juilliard," and you know, just being really encouraging to her. And then that scene was not in the script, as I recall, at least not in the original draft. But the director heard them singing and said, you know, we should have a scene like that in the show, right, to show the bonding. So they actually wrote that in.
Hopefully it makes the cut. That'd be cool. That'd be cool to see.
I'm sure it will. Yeah, but they kept bumping up her role. She was kind of just the, you know, the MacGuffin, the damsel in distress, you know, seen but not heard. But they kept bumping up her lines and her activity in the script. So I think she's gonna have a pretty meaty role in it, which is great.
So in addition, now your wife Mary, she did some acting as well, or was also in media.
Yeah, she's a fantastic actress. She's done a lot on stage and has acted in some of the big theaters in Houston, and has done some hilarious stuff. You know, she's done some of the canonical work. But she's also, you know, the Scarlet Letter type heavy dramas. But she's also done some really funny stuff. There's one where she played. It's a fairly famous play, and I again can't remember the name of it. So sucks to be old. But she actually played. Oh, Sylvia. She plays a dog. She's a human looking thing, right? And like she's not wearing a dog costume or anything like that. Just plays a dog, and it's funny because it's sort of the tale of a dog's jealous attachment to her owner, and he tries to start dating and things like that, and it's just the dog getting in between the relationships, and she goes and she's the biggest germaphobe and just prissy about bugs and dirt, and even with the kids, it's wash your hands 17,000 times a day and blah blah blah. And she was on the stage just licking the guy's pant leg and sniffing around and picking up a dirty ball that had been on the stage floor and carrying across and scooching across the stage. It was just hilarious to watch. I'm like, who is that woman? But she's also been in films and commercials. She's done some nice commercial shoots, but all sort of overtaken by
but it was nice though. It's nice the way you guys paved the way for your daughters. I mean, you guys kind of got the ropes and you understood the game, and then prepped your daughters, and then at such a young age they're already building careers. At 11 years old, she's already doing some pretty cool stuff. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, I would like to think so. It's a fine line. I don't know if you feel this as a parent as well, Scott. I know your son Justin is also quite a talented musician and has a lot going on academically and a lot of possibilities outside as well. But whether it's sports or whether it's arts or even a vocation, to a more standard vocation, there's this fine line that I think we as parents walk, not wanting to feel like we're pushing our kids, not wanting to feel like it's our idea that they're doing these things. And so
tough line.
I'm always trying to check in with the girls and see, it's okay to quit this if you don't like it. Don't because we don't care. And frankly, our lives, I keep letting them know, like, our lives would be easier. You don't want to do this. Our lives get super simple.
And I know we're going to take a break here in a couple minutes, but before we go, I want to say Curtis has kind of approached this, and we've talked about this part, and we'll definitely have a podcast on it, which is you've gone the non-traditional route with education too. And so, you homeschooled your girls, and that has given them a different perspective on life, and they're really good kids. And I think that contributes a lot to their great attitude and their work ethic. I mean, just to do the stuff they do is amazing. And anyway, we'll definitely have to have that discussion at some point.
For sure. I think for girls, we'll just leave it at this, but I'd say, I think for girls especially, avoiding that whole mean girls phase from middle school to
and not to mention the indoctrination and the stuff that goes on in schools now. They just don't.
There's a lot of questionable curriculum activity happening, and not at every school, and certainly not every teacher. My wife's mom was a teacher for 35 years.
Oh, okay, that explains
and
a lot.
That said, and Mary was a teacher for 5 years as well. And that said, they've all seen a lot of changes over that time. So. By no means an indictment of all teachers everywhere or all schools everywhere, but just for us, we found out we found this to be a better path, and it feels weird at first, but if you stop and think about people who are world class at anything, you think about the Williams sisters, for example, in tennis, and they're homeschooled because of course they are, right? Pros at 16, and if you think about any kid who has an acting or music career or something like that early on, I mean, they've all got set tutors. They're all essentially homeschooled. from an early age. So that just worked out better for us on all fronts.
Yeah. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the transition from Hollywood and acting to business in general and what you're doing now. Sound good?
Sounds good, Scott.
All right, take it away, Curtis. Take us into commercial. We'll be right back.
Are you tired of working outside in the heat? Do you hate your boss? Do you want to get paid to sit on your ass and talk for a living? Well, if you answered yes to the last question, then voiceover might be for you. But if you think it's as easy as buying a microphone, hooking it up to your computer, and all of a sudden you're gonna get paid, think again. It's just like your mom told you. You gotta go to school.
You gotta go to school.
And you need to talk to actor, voice actor, director, and producer Jonathan McFadden of Prodigy Talent Training.
I'm Jonathan McFadden.
Jonathan works in the business, so he knows the ins and outs, and he can help you excel in the field you want to. Audiobooks, animation, video games, radio ads, and of course, voiceover. But you can't wait around because classes fill up fast. So get over to calendly.com/prodigytt. Yeah, that's a weird word. Here, I'll spell it. calendly.com/prodigytt. Click new student interview and pick a time that works for you. So listen to your mom and go to Prodigy Talent Training.
You gotta go to school.
Welcome back to the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis. So we're exploring Curtis's transition today from
Hey, careful with the next words.
his transformation from acting in Hollywood to business. So Curtis, what was the drive that sent you into the business world from this buzz around your name and some momentum and a decision point whether to move to LA or stay in Austin? What is it that drove you back into business?
Fear.
Yeah.
If I'm totally honest, I'm totally okay with taking high risk bets when it's just me on the line.
Yeah.
But when it's my family, as a new father at the time, and still newly married, I was coming to grips with even with a wife as supportive as mine was, still coming to grips with making sure I put the family first and not just run off on some wild hair like I had done.
Did this happen to you too when you first become a father? I mean, you're like a CIA agent protecting your wife and your new kid. You're just crazy that way, and so
Get behind me, woman.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. Yeah, I remember just absolutely losing my shit one time when we were driving down Congress, and some drunk college kid, or I don't know how old he was, but was crossing the street and he stopped in traffic and had come across from a gas station and stolen a squeegee, right? And I guess there's friends at the bar on the other side of the street and just making an ass of himself. So I was right in front of him. I was honking at him to get out of the way and let traffic go. And as we pulled out of the intersection and got to their side, I just saw something out of the peripheral vision of my eye on the passenger side, and then heard, and my wife jumped and screamed, and I saw something hit her window, but I didn't know what it was. And before I could think, I just slammed on the brakes and realized, it's sort of in that same moment I'm slamming on the brakes, I'm looking behind and seeing this guy, completing his throwing motion, and realized he had just thrown something at my wife's head. Right.
Oh, wow.
She had her window open, and I don't think he had enough presence of mind to actually aim at her head or even, really to hit the car necessarily, yeah. But he had intent. Right. And I went, full Wolverine on the guy and just, slammed the brakes, jumped out of a car in the middle of oncoming traffic and closed the 50 yards between him and I in about 2 seconds, and was just ready to open him up. And then, his buddies came pouring out of the bar. Please don't, he's completely plastered, please don't hit him. And he couldn't get his, he couldn't get his
I wish I
fist
could have
out.
seen that. That sounds like fun.
Oh man, it was, yeah, but it was one of those things where, like you said, you just get this heightened sense of protectivity. Is that the word?
Protectiveness.
Thank you. Protectiveness, heightened sense of protectiveness, and become, I don't know, become a lion, protecting the pride or something. It was eye-opening, but yeah,
So-
those are the kind of decisions you have to make, and that's, you have to do that financially as well as emotionally, right?
And so that's what kept you in Texas. You just said, you know what, I got a family to think about, and you decided to stay there. And that's, so what did you do then? Besides talk to your manager and talk her off the ledge.
Yeah, exactly. I had a great great W-2 position at this company called Texas Windstorm. I had a lot of good friends and a lot of good people that worked there. Many of whom I'm still friends with to this day. So when I had left, they were all very supportive of me going and trying this acting thing. And when I came back, they said, well, hey, if you want to come back as a consultant, we're happy to bring you on. So came back to that for a couple of years, but realized that I, kind of had gotten the bug, and to be honest with you, I started in business when I was 13. My dad was a serial entrepreneur, and I started a consulting company in England and brought it back to the States, kind of shut it down, did some music stuff, took this W-2 gig for 5 or 6 years. So it was, I kind of had this pattern of sticking my toe in the water and trying it, and then maybe pivoting or going a different direction if I wasn't seeing the success. And that's been an interesting lesson for me, and also something that I try to help clients with as well, because it has good points and bad points. On the one hand, I'm able to cut my losses. If I see that something is not working out well, I don't linger too long. I don't feel so attached to something. On the other hand, I know that not persisting in some areas has cost me. I could have really pioneered a couple of areas that I was involved in, or at least been on that sort of, leading edge.
Yeah. And I know we talked a little bit about this, but that's something that I owe you a great bit, just a huge amount of gratitude. Is, I was at a crossroads in my career, and you and I have had this discussion before about I'm very much a generalist and had been at C-level for quite a while and had been doing a lot of consulting, and so was really at a crossroads. And despite being introduced to the Agile world and Kanban in like 2007 at Qualcomm, had not spent a whole bunch of time in it, and learning from you, and certainly you are a thought leader in that area, especially Kanban for information work or knowledge work. And anyway, I'll say it out loud again, that I owe you a significant debt of gratitude. You really changed the trajectory of my career, and that's how I'm doing what I am doing now. But we still use the thought leadership items that you brought up, 5 years ago. We still use a lot of that stuff now. It's very, very cool. And if people don't know Curtis is one of those guys who knows, he reads an incredible amount, and you're going to get asked your top 3 books you recommend to people before we leave. But Curtis reads a lot, and he gathers all this information, and he puts together the set of best practices. That's really cool. And that's what he did for Kanban for information work. So I know there was a question here, and there was a question that was going to come out of this, but anyway, thank you so much for that. And are you still doing a lot of Kanban work? Are you concentrating more in executive consulting?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
Sure. Some on the operations and delivery side. That's, agile focused delivery.
Yep.
And trying increasingly to move to an area I really, really enjoy, which is working with executives. It gives me the chance to work with folks like yourself, Scott,
Yep.
one-on-one, and really zero in on their needs. Oftentimes, with somebody like yourself, it's so easy because, the knowledge is there. And sometimes it's, well, have you looked into this, or have you thought about that? Or, could we tell this story a little bit better or a little bit differently? I'm certainly not, splitting the atom over here or doing anything where I'm creating something from, de novo, from whole cloth. It's very often just getting people's guns pointed in the right direction, right, so they can hit the target.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had many conversations about the state of corporate America and the way that it works now, and some difficult conversations in that area.
Yeah.
So you definitely have your work cut out for you.
Well, job security, I guess, is one way to look at it.
Yes.
We're certainly not going to change the world overnight, but it's fertile ground. So we try to focus on the things that'll be evergreen, not just now, not just flavor of the day, but still relevant 5-10 years from now. And you mentioned Kanban and Agile. If I could just unpack that a little bit with you. I know you're doing some incredible things in your role at IBM.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've broken down a lot of barriers over there. What are you seeing in terms of the level of corporate acceptance of some of these ideas around agility and applying agility in other areas besides just software development?
It's a really good question. I would say there's really 3 levels. There's that upper executive level, there's that lower executive level, and then there's the field.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say in the field, there's definite momentum, and we're seeing a significant shift. In fact, we probably don't see the typical agile transformations, the Kanban transformations, that just IT does it, or engineering does it, or development, they do it. We're seeing it much more on the business side, and pretty good acceptance. It takes a while because it's different. It's a new way of working. It's very different, but good acceptance there. In the middle layer, I think it's getting there. It's better. It's at the top levels that it's the toughest to get them to understand, because it's just a different world. And in a very large company, there's such a stratification between the people on this high level and the people that are doing the work in the field. There's just such a distance between the two that you got to work every day to bridge that. And did that explain your question? That's what I'm running against.
No, I think that's exactly my experience as well. It reminds me of that old saying, there is no London, there's only a series of villages, right?
Yeah.
I think large companies are very much like that.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing about the Big Bang, and a lot of people do Big Bang stuff, and we don't, of course, we don't ascribe to that, but we typically just find a place to land that's a friendly place, then we spread out from there. And the thing is that when you're doing Kanban for information work, you can do well in a small, concentrated, and then it starts to reach out, over here, over there. And that's what's happening now is it's starting to expand because we're having success in where we landed. And it's very cool to see. But
yeah,
it's interesting.
It is interesting. The parallels between what I what I consider to be good operational behavior, and the practices of a good operational behavior in a Fortune 500 and good operational behavior in a small business are striking to me. And what's funny is that it used to be that the small business would try to emulate the Fortune 500.
Mhm.
And now you see in well-functioning Fortune 500 companies, which is a vanishingly small amount, you see, at least in certain divisions and business units, them trying to emulate small business.
Trying to capture that feeling and that momentum and
being
that
agile, right? Being
culture.
yeah. So
Most definitely.
I think and it's not just a particular flavor of a particular approach. It's not just Kanban or just safe or just Scrum or just less or just pick your poison.
Yeah, it's funny. You open up this, so I'll talk about it. But I was at the Global Kanban Summit last.
Where you rocked it. Congratulations.
Thanks so much. It was very cool. And anyway, went there, and we purposely inserted this into the discussion, and it was, Chris Ring and I are working on this together now. And
shout out to Chris Ring, by the way.
Yep. Awesome. Hey, Chris. And we talk a lot about, we're consultants. We do consult. I haven't done anything different. It's from being a chief operating officer to being a consultant to in my role now. It's about, trying to fix things that are broken. Mm-hmm. And so in that discussion, we said, we don't really care about Kanban. And I'm at a Kanban, and you could hear the hush go over the audience. And it was,
you're incredible.
He said that, and David Anderson is there at the conference, and I said, we just use it because it's the best method that we've seen work right now. It may not be around in 10 years, maybe there'll be something else, but it's the best thing that we've used right now to see results from. And so that's why we use it. But the minute it's not the best, then we'll use whatever's next. Yeah. And that's the nature of the business.
Yeah, you'll pivot. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The more, I mentioned to you when I was on the big production with Prison Break, I was looking at it, when I wasn't trying to memorize lines or something, I was looking at the whole operation from a business standpoint and wondering, how did they make this work? Because, from the time they're greenlit until the time they actually start rolling on episode 1, can be a matter of, sometimes months, but often weeks, just weeks, and sometimes not very many weeks. And they've got to do a hell of a lot. And it struck me that, there's probably, there's no doubt lots of inefficiencies, right? They'll spend more than they have to in order to get something going, but no less inefficiencies than I've seen in literally hundreds. I've consulted with literally hundreds of companies over the past 30 years on 5 continents, and it amazes me that there are suitcases full of cash lying around, right? And yet it seems so difficult for these companies to be nimble, to be agile. And yes, they'll subscribe, they'll pay McKinsey or Accenture or millions of dollars to come in and run some playbook, but they don't move with the same nimbleness that this Hollywood production company moves. Right.
That must have been cool, sitting there watching that, taking a look at all the coordination and looking around and all the things that had to come together, and look at that. That is truly a business person waiting to get out of an actor's body.
It really, I've always had one foot in both worlds, and which is probably why I'm not at the top of the game in either world, but it is a more interesting life to me to have this sort of dual perspective, this stereoscopic perspective.
And by the way, Curtis is being modest, so I think you're doing pretty well.
Yeah. Well, Thanks. But it is really fun, and I think there's a whole bunch of lessons that we constantly apply. I mean, for those who haven't heard the Scott show, I highly recommend you go back and listen to Around the World with Scott, because man, talk about somebody who's worn a bunch of hats. As you know, Scott, you've done it too. You've done air traffic controlling. You've played, pro or at least semi-pro tennis on the circuit. You've surfed around the world at a world-class level. You've run your own businesses and sold businesses and run.
And interestingly, like you have consulted for so many companies, and it really does give you a rounded view of the state of of business and the struggles. And you were alluding to something earlier, which is, when you move from a startup's cool because you can just pivot on a dime, and it's very easy. And even your the IT that you're working on to support your business is newer. It's quicker. It's more lean. And then, with larger companies, it's just hard to change. And I would argue it's most hard to change the culture. I mean, that's a really tough nut to crack. And I don't know about you, but for me, there's great joy in, you get that inch a day forward. And I find great joy in that, because I know that, for any consultant or anybody that's at a company, you're just looking how to win in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can just get them to move forward as a consultant or someone within a company, just get them to move one more step. I mean, that is just incredibly gratifying.
Yep. Just get to the next plot point, get to the next beat, absolutely. Yep. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Scott. What would you say is the biggest problem overall that you see in significantly sized companies? Let's call them enterprises, not necessarily Fortune 500, but enterprise sized companies, 500 million and up, something like that.
I was having this discussion with someone else. I'm trying to remember. I can't even remember her name right now, and I apologize. She's the one who wrote the Chief Customer Officer book. Jeannie, gosh, what is her last name? But we were having the same discussion. And I think the toughest part in all the companies that I've been in, the toughest part is that executive courage to really make change. You'd brought this up before. When you're an executive, and it's funny, the reason I know this is because I behave this way. You have your 3 or 4 things in your toolkit, and you keep on going to them. And but as an executive, to have that courage, I look at it, say you're in a Fortune 500 company and you're a director level or you're VP level, and that's not really super high, but it's executive level. How do you do something really different, or try to do something that's out of the ordinary for this group and survive? I mean, it's really tough because you're kind of going counterculture. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe it's still the executive courage, or I'd say that's still we agreed that that's probably one of the areas that's the toughest. Yeah, and it's not because it's hard. I mean, to have that courage, it takes courage. I mean, that's tough. And you're risking a lot.
Oftentimes you're working against people's self-interest when you talk about change.
That's your area. You always talk about that. You're up against someone's bonus.
Yeah.
I mean, you can play along.
Line, right? You're sooner or later you're up against somebody's bonus.
Yeah, I mean, you can play along and do the things that you're supposed to, and go ahead and there's an inducement to go that path.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes courage to do that other thing. And that one doesn't always lead to immediate rewards. And That's scary for some people, I think.
Yep.
I don't know, what's your opinion? That's Scott's deep thoughts on
Yeah, completely. And we've, as you said, we've had this discussion. I think executive courage is absolutely the most lacking resource in any organization. And I would say it's closely followed by the correct executive motivation. And by that, I mean, it's a lot like politics, right? You know, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, he gets there full of vim and vigor and ready to do the right thing for his district, and then quickly gets sucked into the political swamp.
Yep.
And realizes that there's no way practically to achieve the things he wants to achieve without making compromises, and sometimes ethical compromises, hopefully not moral compromises, but it's very tough. And I think the same predicament faces many executives and many big corporations. Like, hey, I got 2 kids in private school, I got a mortgage, it's pretty healthy to maintain the lifestyle to which we've become accustomed, and you got to show up at work in an Armani suit every day and look the part, right? It's hard to say I'm going to stick my neck out, and that is often what I think is required. And what's even more troubling is, in the current environment, I think those decisions are going to be forced on the executives rather quickly.
What do you mean? You mean it's going to be forced?
I think, as we had talked about on one of our current previous podcasts, I think the economic situation globally and domestically is going to force a lot of companies to really revisit their cost structures. For example, for JP Morgan Chase, and you've just sold 100,000 square feet of Class A office space in New York. Do we need to reacquire such office space in the future? Maybe not.
Probably not now. Yeah.
So that's going to have all kinds of downstream market effects, right? It's also going to put a lot of managers in a really difficult position. I was a COO for a small app development firm here that had about 7,500 employees, something like that. And, we had Class A office space here in Austin. This is back in 2010, 2011, something like that. And we also had a pretty generous work from home policy. So I was brought in to kind of help position the company for acquisition, turn a few things around in the development area. But it's difficult. If you're a traditional manager, it's difficult to manage absentee employees. I say absentee, but remote employees. It's difficult. And unless you have those tools in your toolkit, which, let's be honest, most managers don't, you'll struggle to know whether people are doing their job or not. And
interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. That's interesting. Because since COVID, and we were lucky enough, we were working together at that time, and 6 months before COVID, we'd already converted to 100% remote almost, and so that was just our lives. We had to adjust. We didn't really have a choice. So you figure out how to do that. I would expect that most people are pretty. Do you think people have adjusted, or do you think they're still waiting to go back?
I think people do the activity around work remotely just fine, and I think the individual contributors, the software developers, the graphic designers, the hands-on keyboards folks who really have those skills, will be absolutely fine remote. It's the more difficult role will be for the middle managers to be able to know, to gauge, is their team delivering? And if they're not delivering, what levers do I pull? How do I know who on the team specifically is not delivering? In the absence of just outright complaints about,
Interesting. Yeah. you're bringing up a whole thing that I'm just dying to talk about at some point. Maybe I'll just bring it up. I'm reading team topologies right now,
Mhm.
and it's, if you're looking at, and I guess this is probably development related, but it could be other areas as well. If you're looking at the unit, I guess you're managing the individual level, but if you're looking at the unit as a team, then as long as you're getting the output from the team, I guess the argument can be made, then you're doing what you need to do. I suppose. Anyway, I'm curious to comment on that, because I'm kind of on that way of thinking, that if you think team and you're looking at maximizing the output of team,
Mhm.
then doesn't matter as much. I mean, certainly if you want to make the team good and there's someone that's underperforming on the team, that typically surfaces, and then you've got to adjust the team because that sends the right signal to the team.
Mhm.
But otherwise, you're just trying to optimize the team output.
True. And in a lot of areas, right? In sports, if you're a football coach, if you're running a donut shop, if you're if you've got an assembly line, it's easier to spot the underperformers, right? It's harder in knowledge work.
Yeah.
And people can talk an awfully good game, and there can be a lot of poor performance buried underneath PowerPoint, impressive looking PowerPoint decks.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
And there can be a lot of, a lot of wasted, a lot of productivity bodies buried beneath the lines of the income statement.
Yeah. I got to tell you a quick story then. So I'm in, so surfing's the new golf, right? I'm in Costa Rica, and
For those of you who have coordination, perhaps.
Yeah. So in the water in Costa Rica surfing, and I start chit-chatting with this guy. Yeah. And of course he's in IT as well. And he told me the craziest thing. They had offshored a lot of their work, and they'd also accepted corp to corp work. And their productivity went down, and they figured out that these people that they were doing corp to corp were signing up for multiple, like one person, two jobs.
Yeah.
And so they of course they're not going to produce. So I thought that was really interesting.
I wouldn't say,
guess that leads.
I wouldn't say of course they're not going to produce. I would say that's not necessarily that lack of productivity is not necessarily a function of the nature of the working arrangement. That lack of productivity is a function of lack of management tools.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. In their case, they were straight up, they were supposed to be single providers for development for that company. And what they've done is, they just lied, and they were working on two companies. So it's not I'm not saying things, because, you and I both use corp to corp a lot, and it works great. But this was, we need you to be a developer, you're a subcontractor, and you agree to dedicate yourself to this work. It's 40 hours a week. Well, yeah, it was 40 and 40.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so interesting as well to see, we talk about managing remote workers, and I know we're up against a break, but I'll just say this before we go to commercial, and that is, it's so interesting to me to see the difference in motivation in the corporate world. And it's really one of the reasons that I keep my hand, even personally, not just, my daughter's activities, but my own personal hand in, some area of creativity, because the motivation you see on a film set or a stage is incredible.
Yeah.
And people, in my experience, people are generally much more willing to give extra hours, and you really see a sort of team mentality. It's not, it's rarely, the stage crew versus the actors, or the actors versus the gaff, the gaffers, or something like that. It really is much more of a team sport. And that is something I think we're constantly striving in our roles as executives or as consultants to try and impart into the organizations we work with.
Culture again.
Culture strikes
So,
again.
so when we come back, Curtis is going to have the 3 top books that he recommends for our listeners. You ready for that?
I'm ginning it up right now.
All right, sounds good. So we'll be right back with the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis.
A modern take on a classic tale. A quest for revenge and to save the world from evil incarnate. Dracula Retold by S.G.D. Singh, an audiobook available now on Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. Will a group of wayward and unexpected heroes have what it takes to prevent the end of life as we know it at the hands and teeth of Count Dracula? Start listening now to find out.
All right. Welcome back to the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis. And here we have Curtis's 3 book recommendations, top 3. So Curtis's top 3 book recommendation list. Go ahead, Curtis. Which top 3 books?
All right. One of my top books of all time for everybody is a book called Range by David Epstein. And Scott, I think I mentioned that book to you a while back. Have you read that?
I have it. I have not, but you have to understand that, Curtis, every time we talk, and we talk a lot, you recommend like 2 or 3 books. So I can't keep up. So I do have it. It'll eventually make me, I will read it.
Fair enough. Yeah, Range is fantastic. Epstein also wrote a book called The Sports Gene, which was recommended by a mutual colleague of ours, Maurice Hager. And shout out to Maurice. He's another agile thought leader. Hope he's doing well. And I took a look at The Sports Gene. I actually came across Epstein separately through a different podcast I frequent called Econ Talk. And his book Range is just fabulous. It's this book in which he posits what's called the Roger versus Tiger paradox.
Yep.
Right? And he talks about, he opens the book with this introduction of, well, we all know that the way to get good in sports is to start early, right? And he talks about Tiger Woods starting to play when he was 3, and he was able to develop that muscle memory, and that's why he became such a prodigy at such a young age. And eventually, one of the greatest golfers of all time. And he said, everybody knows that, right? And that's why parents drive kids to do things at an early age. But how do you explain somebody like Roger Federer, who was somebody who participated in a lot of different sports and really didn't settle in on tennis until he was about 14 years old?
Which is old for tennis.
Which is old for tennis, right?
Yeah.
And, subsequently became...
He did pretty well, didn't he?
20 Grand Slams, he's doing okay.
Yeah.
For a long time was considered, the GOAT of tennis, and perhaps now eclipsed by Nadal and Djokovic, but still, top 3, top 5 ever.
Yeah. And
the question is, how do you reconcile these 2 different approaches to something like sport? And he talks about the literature of expertise, and there's some other good books we could talk about in terms of how one becomes an expert. And you've probably heard of the 10,000 hours rule that was coined by the guy who wrote Blink. I'm trying to go, Malcolm Gladwell. Thank you. And the point of Range is that, and he goes into not just sports, he goes into business, he goes into medicine, he goes into engineering, he goes into all these different fields. And talks about the confluence of events, serendipity, and really the broad outlook that people often bring to problems from outside their field of specialty, right? So sometimes the toughest engineering problems are solved by people who are not formally trained engineers. Sometimes the toughest mathematical problems are solved by people who are not top of their field in university.
And you and I, we've talked about this. It is definitely a style of working now in the United States. I don't know about elsewhere, but it's definitely slanted towards specialists. I mean,
hyper specialization.
Yeah. And to tell you the truth, that was when I talked to you, that's what I was struggling with. I was a chief operating officer, but I was much more of a generalist. Give me a problem and I'll figure out the problem. I don't really care about where it comes from, but that was not what the market is. The market was, you need to be specialized at startups. You need to be specialized at this or that or this. And it was embedded into the culture. So it was a little bit frustrating for someone like me.
For sure. And I'm the same way. I'm very much a deep generalist, right? I can go deep into 3 areas, but I like a lot of different areas to play in, and I can contribute in a lot of different areas. So
deep generalist who gets bored early or gets bored easily. Yeah.
Yes. But it helps my clients not to have to pay for a business model that relies on draining them dry for years and years, right?
Exactly.
To give them results quickly, and they need different help or more help. That's a separate issue, right? But
yeah.
So Range is one, highly recommended, fantastic. Okay. And Epstein is an excellent writer and a physicist by training, as I recall.
Like our guest Anton.
Right? Yep. So really, really cool read. Another excellent book in keeping with the topics of discussion today is called Play, co-authored by a medical doctor named Dr. Stuart Brown. And this was a book that came out maybe 20 years ago. Was one of the first to really talk about the necessity of play in human beings for developing a healthy mind and developing a sense of our place in the world, and developing a sense of what our skills are in the world and what our preferences are, what our capabilities are. We know that animals play to learn all the time, right? You see the National Geographic video of the lion cubs fighting with each other to learn how to hunt, right? To learn how to fight, but they pull their punches with their siblings. And we've, as a sports jock, that sports is great for all kinds of things in terms of developing skills and capabilities and confidence and character, teamwork, right? But also knowing how to take a loss and get back up, right? Like you get your ass beat and you say, yeah, good game. Can't hide from the loss, right? Numbers are on the scoreboard. So, and that, by the way, this is a topic for another day, but that, by the way, is something I really fear for a lot of kids today. I think that ethos over the past 10, 15 years is being eroded. Here's a trophy for showing up today.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah, that is definitely a subject for another day, because I think we could have that discussion on just the generational differences and where we see the trend. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to, congratulate your kid as a parent or your buddy, say, hey, good game, but it's another to, to shield them from the pain of a fair loss, because there's a lot of that in life, right? That's most of life.
Yep. So what's number 3?
So book number 3, this is kind of a geeky specialist book. If you're exploring the areas that Scott and I are in right now, you might enjoy a book by Robert Kaplan called Relevance Lost. And Relevance Lost is probably 35, 40 years old at this point, but is an exploration of the origins of management cost accounting and what it was good for when it was originated, and what it misses.
So
Particularly
is this where you had your intro? Is this where you had your intro to throughput accounting?
No,
No.
it's different than throughput accounting. Kaplan really does. It's almost a history book about management cost accounting. He talks about things called, for example, shop floor accounting, what we would probably call operational accounting in our world. And there have been some attempts trying to implement Kaplan over the years. I don't know if you remember the infamous activity-based costing exercise of the late 80s, early 90s. It was kind of a disaster. But it's one of those books that it doesn't necessarily deliver the answer, but asks really great questions. And the answer, I think, is something that many of us are still working on. And I have some thoughts. I have some opinions on this, but also I'm working towards a way of implementing methods to take advantage of this type of thinking, particularly for companies that deal primarily in knowledge work, right?
So folks, that's it for our show today. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week we don't know, not yet, but we will.
We've got a couple of good possibilities, Scott, that I hope we can lock down this week, and it'll be real treats for our listeners. So tune in.
That sounds great. Thanks so much for joining The Outspoken with Scott and Curtis. Until next week, take care.